Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone. Before I go any further, just a little bit of an explanation and an apology. I am not able to be in the room where I normally shoot all of my videos. As you can see from the background behind me, there is no green screen. Just because of some technical and practical realities, I've had to shoot in a different room today. In this room here, the lighting is probably not going to be as sharp, and you might hear a few extra noises and things that you wouldn't normally hear on my videos. Hopefully though, even though the technical side of things is not 100% today, the content will still be up to its usual high standard. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that. Let's talk about the topic of today's video. The people who are the staunch defenders of Star Wars The Last Jedi and what I think they're getting wrong. One thing I've noticed since this film got released, and it's obviously attracted a lot of criticism, is that there is now a very vocal group of defenders of this film. These people I like to call the critics of The Last Jedi. These are the people who liked the film to varying degrees and who are now going out of their way to try and defend the film and make all sorts of claims about how good and deep and nuanced and profound they think this film actually is. And in this video, I want to explore 6 common things that I'm hearing from that group of people, the critics of The Last Jedi, and these 6 common fallacies that I hear and I see being shared around the internet left, right, and center, and why I think they just don't stack up. So the first fallacy is this. You'll hear people saying, you've got to watch this movie more than once, and if you watch it more than once, you'll really get it, you'll understand. No, this is not a piece of high art. This is not high concept, indie, multi-layered, impressionist art film. This is a pretty basic sort of blockbuster fantasy film. You shouldn't have to watch it more than once. What's really going on there is that people watched it once and they were shocked and disappointed by it. They went back a second time, and this time their expectations were so low because they were so disappointed that now I think what's happened is they've actually started to accept or turn a blind eye to what are the blatant problems in this film. As I said, this is not multi-layered. This is not nuanced filmmaking. This is not like, say, No Country for Old Men, where you sit down and each time you watch it, you get something new out of it. You see something different. This is a pretty straightforward kind of film. Trust your initial instincts. If your initial instincts upon seeing this film were, hold on, what the heck's going on here, then I would say trust those instincts. Because as I said, this is not deep, high art. This is not profound, multi-layered filmmaking. It's basic popcorn, blockbuster, action, sci-fi, fantasy filmmaking, and it shouldn't require multiple viewings at all. The second fallacy that you hear people making is, oh, this is just a movie about space wizards and laser swords, or this is just a fantasy film. What do you expect? Well, hold on a minute. And interestingly enough, I've heard people who make the first claim that this is something you have to watch multiple times to really get, also often making the second claim as well that this is just a mere fantasy film, or this is just a kid's movie. Well, it can't be both, right? It can't be a film that's so complex and multi-layered that you have to watch it multiple times to actually understand and get the nuance of what's going on here, and at the same time be just a mere fantasy film that's so simple that it's not a particularly strong or well-told story. It can't be both, right? So which is it? But there's a problem with this line of reasoning as well that goes much deeper. And the problem is this, that basically what's being suggested here is that certain genres of film or storytelling basically shouldn't be, or you shouldn't expect them to follow the basic norms of good storytelling. What people are suggesting here is that if you go and watch a fantasy film, then the storytelling should be whatever the heck the writers and the director wanted it to be, regardless of whether it's coherent, it makes sense, or got plot holes or anything like that. That's absolute nonsense. Genre should not determine whether or not you tell a good story. Regardless of what the genre is, you should aim to tell a good story if you're going to make a film. That's really what the heart of it is about. It's about good characters. It's about a good story arc. It's about a plot that makes sense. It's about motivations that are clear and coherent, right? And that's where this film falls down. It's got nothing to do with the fact that this is fantasy storytelling. I mean, think about something like Lord of the Rings, for example. Profound piece of fantasy storytelling. There's no way that you could say about that story, oh, well, it's just fantasy, don't worry, the storytelling's going to be rubbish. It's a prime example of how something can be fantasy and a very, very well told story. Now, obviously, we don't expect Star Wars necessarily to be at that level of storytelling, but it shouldn't be what we saw in The Last Jedi with some of these basic problems and holes. Now, the whole idea too that people are saying this is just a kids' movie, to me I find that a little bit frustrating, because it suggests to me that, first of all, what are we really teaching our kids about to what they should expect when they go to the cinema? If we're saying to them, let's just serve this kind of stuff up with some glaring problems and failures of storytelling and structure and character development, all these kind of things, and then we say to our kids, oh, well, this is it, kids, this is the best you can hope for. Surely we can do better than this. Like I said, there's no such thing as perhaps a perfect story, and we don't expect Star Wars to be at that sort of, artistic high level, but you don't expect there to be such glaring and basic failures of storytelling in a movie, particularly one that's got a budget and the ability to be created at another level, right? This is not someone feverishly working away on a minimal budget in their mum's basement. This is something that's a massive financial-backed, studio-backed, massive budget film. And it's a long-standing franchise now. This is a property that has a long history, that's very well developed. There's really no reason for what we saw in The Last Jedi to be put on screen. And secondly, I would really question whether this is a kids' movie. If you look at the content of this film, and even The Force Awakens, The Force Awakens starts with an act of genocide in a village where a whole lot of stormtroopers just kill and slaughter a whole lot of innocent men, women, and children. This is really not a kid's film. It doesn't seem consistent to me to be saying, on the one hand, oh, this is just a kid's film and kids shouldn't expect anything more than this, and at the same time, the content of the film clearly is more than just made for children, right? The third fallacy I'm hearing a lot of is this claim that people like me who are critical of The Last Jedi somehow were just upset about the fact that there was a character development that happened with Luke Skywalker and perhaps maybe some of our other favourite characters from Star Wars, and we really didn't like the character development that happened, or we didn't believe that you should ever change Luke Skywalker from what he was, say, at the end of Return of the Jedi. That's absolute nonsense. There's absolutely no problem at all with character development. In fact, I'm someone, if you watch my other videos, I actually thought that Luke and the way they created him as this disillusioned and sort of old Jedi who had lost faith, really, in humanity. I like that aspect, and I thought that was great character development. But here's the problem. The problem is not with developing a character and changing the character in new directions as they age and the story develops. The problem is the way that was executed. You've actually got to earn some of these things here, because Luke Skywalker is one of the most established characters in cinematic history. His story is just so well known by so many people, and his character traits are so well established. And if you're going to do something like drastically shift his character in another direction, you've got to earn that. You've actually got to write good story points to get us from where he was at the end of Return of the Jedi to where you want to take him in this film. Like I said, I've got no problem with where they wanted to take him in this film. The problem is, from point A to point B, Return of the Jedi to The Last Jedi, this bit in between is where they failed. And one really classic example of this, it's not the fact that he's a wizened old Jedi and he's upset and angry at the world. It's the fact that they didn't really give a good motivation for what happened between him and Kylo Ren. My younger brother Tim said to me that what they should have done in his version of the movie, this is what they would have done anyway, was they should have had Luke Skywalker realize what was going on with Kylo Ren and then refused to carry on with the training. And that would have been the trigger for Kylo Ren that got him so angry and upset that he just flipped out and destroyed the Jedi Academy. What I suggested was that they should also add another little plot point in there, that perhaps Luke realized that Kylo Ren was getting out of control, and so he thinks, well, if I go and leave my students in the care of the elderly staff, I can go and find Leia, his mother, bring her back, and she can talk to Kylo Ren and convince him perhaps to tone things down a bit, and we can perhaps bring him back from the brink here. And while he's away trying to retrieve Leia, that's when Kylo Ren flips out and he says to everyone who's gathered there that you're either with me or against me, which is a theme we've seen before with the whole Sith thing. And what happens is that those who go with him become the Knights of Ren, which satisfies that plot point, and those who don't, he slaughters and destroys the place. And then Luke gets back and discovers this, and this is the thing that breaks his heart and breaks his spirit. Instead, what we get in this film, though, is this absurd idea of Luke Skywalker in what I would describe as a Frank Spencer-esque moment. If you don't know who Frank Spencer is, after you've watched this video, go and Google or look up on YouTube British comedy Frank Spencer, and you will see what I mean. Frank Spencer was this bumbling idiot of a character who always made an absolute mess of things. And here is this moment with Luke Skywalker. He is in a really creepy sort of way, is in Kylo Ren's hut at night while he's sleeping. He's got his lightsaber there, and he is contemplating murdering his own nephew. Now, if you're going to get to that point, you're going to try and take us as an audience to that point in a very well-established story, you've actually got to earn that. You can't just have Luke suddenly going, I think maybe murdering my nephew might be the way to solve this problem. And then we have this Frank Spencer-esque moment where he's standing there. Oh, I've ignited me lightsaber, Mr. Kylo. No, it's all misunderstanding. I don't really want to kill you. Oh, please don't use the Force on me. And it's this absurd moment of mistaken identity and I'm going to possibly murder my own nephew. It just had no place in this film, and it's a terrible plot point. It's bad writing. It's just bad writing. There's no other way to put it. What they should have done was actually found a properly executed and effective way of creating and crafting that part of the story so it actually made sense and was consistent with what has already been well established. And that was one of the big things for a lot of people. It's not that there's character development happening. The problem is the way they executed that character development and how flawed the execution was. Another fallacy I'm hearing a lot of is this claim that, well, the original trilogy, A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, that wasn't perfect storytelling. It had flaws in it. So what are you complaining about this one for? Well, yes, that's true. The original trilogy did have flaws in it. No one's saying it was perfect storytelling. In fact, I think most people are sane enough to realize that there is pretty much no such thing as a perfect movie. There's very, very, very few films you could actually claim are perfect films, and certainly not that original trilogy. It's not perfect filmmaking, but the problems and the flaws that you might see in the original trilogy are very, very different to what we see in this new trilogy, in particular in The Last Jedi. And one of the big problems here is I've seen people saying, well, there's some similarities and people didn't get upset about, say, for example, this is one example of a plot point that people are referring to a lot. Well, we don't really know much about who Emperor Palpatine was in Return of the Jedi and in that first trilogy. They don't tell his backstory and no one really got upset about that. It's because we didn't need to know his backstory. We knew everything we needed to know about Emperor Palpatine in that first trilogy. It was just really well done storytelling. Right, we're introduced to him very briefly in The Empire Strikes Back, and then he comes into his own in Return of the Jedi. And the Emperor Palpatine is this evil character who is like, he's Darth Vader on steroids, and he's got all these extra powers. He can shoot lightning from his fingertips. This is like evil on a whole nother level. This is malevolence like we've never seen before. And we get enough of who he is, the way he's portrayed, the way he's written. It's clear what his role is in the story. He appears not in the first film in the trilogy, but really in the final film is where he really comes into his own. And it all makes sense. We don't need to know his backstory. It's obvious. We're effectively told everything we need to know. But Snoke, for example, is nothing like the Emperor Palpatine. And the reason this is different is because, well, not only is Snoke introduced in the first film of this new trilogy, but this is a very well-established universe now, and we are talking about a series of films that are supposed to be sequels to that original trilogy. They are following that, they're built in that same universe, they follow a certain continuity, there's a well-established lore here, there's a well-established universe, there's a well-established set of characters and events that have brought us to this point. And then all of a sudden you introduce this new and very, very evil and superpowered villain in the form of Snoke. Once again, no one's got any issues with that. The problem, though, is that there's big questions because you've got already here, unlike the Emperor Palpatine in the original trilogy, you've got a well-established universe now. And everyone knows something quite important. They know that up until this point, there were really two evil bad dudes who were ruling the universe. One of them was Darth Vader, and the other one was Emperor Palpatine. And now in this new trilogy, we are being introduced to a brand new evil villain who is not just a villain, he is superpowered. This guy has got amazing force powers. He is evil, he's malevolent, he commands his own armies. So where has he been all this time? Who is he? Where did he come from? Remember, this is a well-established universe and story already. They're not starting from scratch. If they were starting from scratch, then possibly they could get away with not giving us any of that backstory. It's just a matter of saying he's just this evil, powerful guy. Remember, like the first trilogy did. But now, this is a well-established universe, a well-established lore. And that means you've got to give us explanations that make sense. Because now when you go back and watch that original trilogy, there's this big burning question. Where's Snoke in all of this? Who is he? Where is he while this is all going on? How come he's never been mentioned? Why is he not part of this story if he's such a powerful evil villain who's clearly part of the Empire, right? So you have to give an explanation for that character to actually make sense. They didn't give an explanation and then they quickly murder him off in this particular movie. It's not good storytelling. It's not good storytelling. And comparing it to the original prequels, the original trilogies, and saying, well, the original trilogies did some of the same things and no one complained about that, it's because you're comparing apples and oranges. It's not the same thing. And like I said, no one's claiming that that original trilogy was perfect, but I tell you what, the original trilogy, for all its flaws, is far better storytelling than what we are seeing unfolding, largely thanks to The Last Jedi, in this particular trilogy here. The fifth fallacy you'll hear a lot of from the critics of The Last Jedi is this claim that this was a film that was going in a new direction and people just don't get it or they don't like the new direction. Well, I don't see that. When I look at this film, I do not see a new direction here. I see so many of the same old Star Wars tropes and nostalgia pieces being rearranged on that chessboard that I don't think you can justify the claim at all that this is a new direction. They are shuffling characters around and they are, getting rid of some of the old ones and bringing in some new ones. And no one's got a problem with that, by the way. We will understand that they had to do that. The actors are getting old. You can't just be rehashing the same story over and over and over again. But this film is effectively still Star Wars. It's just a badly executed version of Star Wars, and that's not the same thing as a movie that is going in some bold new direction and giving us something new and different that we've never seen before. It's just giving us an inferior remake, effectively, of stuff we've already seen before. And the sixth and final fallacy that I'm hearing from the fans of The Last Jedi is this, that all of the criticisms, or most of the criticisms of The Last Jedi are nothing more than a bunch of die-hard fanboys who got upset that their fan fiction wasn't made into a movie. And they had all these fan fiction theories in their heads about The Last Jedi and what it should be. And because the writers didn't write their version of The Last Jedi, they're all just upset and they've got a bit butthurt and they're screaming about it and moaning about it. No, that is not the problem here at all. This is about a combination of factors and flaws, effectively, in The Last Jedi that are all, if you look at them objectively, they are classic examples of bad storytelling. They are failures in the telling of the story. That's where the problem lies. I had absolutely no fan theories about what I wanted to see out of this film at all. I went in as a blank slate, and what I saw was a film with some objective flaws in it. And I had a bad experience and I walked away pretty ho-hum. And over the next couple of days, I realized after watching the film that the reason I was so ho-hum was because the storytelling in this movie is not particularly good. Now, we are still in the honeymoon phase of this new movie, and what happens in the honeymoon phase is everyone just goes gaga over the film, particularly if it's a big franchise. We're talking about Star Wars here. Everyone just, wow, this is amazing, it's so amazing, best movie ever, it's even better than Empire Strikes Back, which is one of the most absurd claims I've heard about this film, by the way, but it's the most amazing thing ever. And then what happens is, about 6 months to a year later, people who were still in that honeymoon phase, like a lot of people are right now, they start to realize on subsequent viewings of the film that in actual fact, once that sort of mania has died down, this ain't such a good film after all, and more people start coming to their senses. And I think that's what's going to happen in time, and people will start to realize as they come to their senses that you've got a whole lot of problems here that are objectively flawed in the telling of the story of The Last Jedi. Things like setups and teasers from The Force Awakens that were never ever delivered on. And by the way, that's not fanboys making stuff up in their minds. That's the original film in this new trilogy setting things up that are then not delivered or are poorly executed in this movie. You've got plot holes in The Last Jedi and pointless subplots that kill the pacing of the movie. You've got ideological preaching instead of a story that reflects meaningful heroism and virtue, which is something that was part of the original Star Wars. And that's why this new film, The Last Jedi, is just receiving so much criticism, I think, from a lot of people, is because it's got no heart. It's got lots of ideological preaching, but it's got no heart. There's no heroes here. There's no self-sacrifice. There's no virtue. It's just people telling us about these things, but they're not really being presented on screen in a meaningful way to us, unlike the first trilogy, for all of its flaws. You have main characters who are woefully underdeveloped or even badly written in this. You have a lack of tonal consistency, and a lot of that is due to the humour in this particular film. You've got a Star Wars movie that has effectively got jokes in this movie. It's meant to be a serious Star Wars film that's got jokes that were or could have been written for a Seth MacFarlane Family Guy Star Wars parody. You've got parody humour in a Star Wars film. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. You have got a second film here with almost zero plot arc. The characters are effectively in the same place at the end of the film as where they were at the beginning of the film. There's zero development, really. I mean, some changes, but they're in the same place from beginning to end of the film. And you've also got this film that doesn't really feel like the second film in a three-part trilogy. It feels kind of like the final film, even though it's badly executed. It feels more like a badly executed final film in a trilogy, instead of what the second film in a trilogy should be, something that perhaps develops and takes things in new directions, and then leaves you with a cliffhanger waiting for and wondering what's going to happen next. There's none of that you could say is true about The Last Jedi. It just doesn't leave you wondering what's going to happen next at all. You have one of the most absurd moments ever seen, and this is in a series of films that includes Jar Jar Binks and Anakin Skywalker talking about sand. And that absurd sequence, no, it's not when Luke is drinking breast milk out of that sea cow thing. That was bad enough. I'm talking about Princess Leia, a well-established character in this universe who all of a sudden, for no reason and with no explanation given, is now using force powers in the extreme that we've never ever seen her use before. And not only that, but we've never seen anyone use these force powers before. Even in the prequels, remember when at the start of The Phantom Menace, when the bad guys try and poison the two Jedis, what do they have to do? They have to put on rebreathers, or they have to put on masks that they put into their mouths to stop suffocating, right? They don't appear to be able to use the Force to protect themselves at all. And yet here we have Leia, who is able to be out in space. And everyone knows the rules, right? Out in space, there's no oxygen for her to breathe, and yet somehow the Force is protecting her, I guess. There's no real explanation given. And then she Supermans her way, or Mary Poppins, depending on which gender you prefer. She flies her way back into the spaceship. Like, that was absurd. Even people who like this film, the honest people who like this film, are saying that was absurd. That should be a warning bell for you. You should have big sirens blaring in your head. Hold on a minute. Maybe I'm not actually being 100% honest when I defend this film as one of the greatest Star Wars movies ever made, if even I, as someone who likes the film, can see such a blatantly absurd moment in this particular film. Like I said, this is a series of films that includes Jar Jar Binks and Anakin talking about sand, and yet The Last Jedi still managed to top that in the absurdity. Basically, in a nutshell, the critics of The Last Jedi are not a group of people who went along and watched this film and then said, oh, I don't like what they've made there. I wish they'd made my version of the film, and so I'm going to get upset about it. That's not what's going on here. Instead, this is a group of people, and I include myself in this, obviously, who went to the film and then came out of it thinking, hold on a minute, what happened there? Why is this going on? What the heck is happening here? This doesn't make sense at various points in the film, right? Or on reflecting back on the film and realizing, hold on a minute, that's a big plot hole right there. Or that's a big pointless diversion that just doesn't make any sense, right? This is bad writing. This is not about people who disagree with the writing directions that they took. This is about people who look and see that they didn't execute a film particularly well on the storytelling side of things. I mean, there's no doubting the visuals in this. They're amazing. And everything else that you expect to see from a Star Wars film is there, except for the storytelling. And ironically enough, the original trilogy, even though, it was a big blockbuster special effects bonanza, it wasn't perfect in that regard. But where its real strength was in the storytelling. Those imperfections, You looked past because the characters and the story and everything else was meaningful and it spoke to you in a way that actually went beyond just superficial stuff. Instead, what we've got here is a movie where effectively the original Star Wars, what you have is they use the special effects and the sort of the mind-blowing visuals. They're the vehicle. And sitting in the driver's seat of that vehicle is a good story. Good bunch of characters, a good story, and they are driving the vehicle. So what's more important is the person behind the wheel, right? That's what really matters here. In The Last Jedi, what we've got is they've effectively just taken the driver out and they've got an unmanned vehicle. They've now got lots of amazing visuals and everything else that we've come to know and love, but no one's behind the wheel driving it all. And they're hoping that, hey, look, nostalgia point, hey, look, amazing visual. And they didn't really focus as much attention on creating a solid and coherent. It doesn't have to be complex, just simple would be fine. No one's asking for complex, it's just a simple story. And so as a result, people like me have looked at the film and have gone, yeah, this is not good storytelling. The problem here is not that we disagree with the direction you've taken the film. The problem is the way you've executed is not particularly good. Interestingly enough, I think of the 3 films that have so far been released by Disney since they have taken possession of Star Wars, the 3 films they've released, I think the best by far is Rogue One. Interestingly enough, Rogue One too is in a very tightly prescripted sort of environment. I mean, we know the events that it's leading up to. They don't have a lot of room to move the story in massive different directions, but still, despite that fact, they managed to give us a new piece of creative storytelling. Now, it wasn't perfect. There's problems in that movie for sure, but it's creative and it feels like Star Wars, but it feels like Star Wars was something new about it. And interestingly enough, it's a film that was very tightly boxed in by the parameters that it had to live up to. It's going directly into A New Hope. They can't really muck around too much with the story, and yet they still managed to produce something creative and new, right? Despite its imperfections. The Last Jedi, they had all the scope in the world to be as creative and new as they wanted to be, and they executed it badly. And to me, that's where the real problem lies here. So next time someone tries to throw any of these fallacies at you, just say to them, hey, look, this is not about any of the things that you've just listed. This is about storytelling. And the problem with The Last Jedi is the storytelling just wasn't that good. It was subpar. And that's why thousands upon thousands of people who went to see this film are now upset and annoyed and frustrated and venting the most appropriate and only way they know how, which is to get online and share their frustrations about this movie. As I said, I think once the honeymoon phase ends, they're going to be joined by a lot more people, just like what happened with the prequels, who look back now in hindsight and realise they weren't quite as good as they thought they were when they were still stuck in the honeymoon phase. As per usual, I'd love to know what you think, so please leave a comment in the comment section below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Is there anything I've missed? Let me know in the comment section below. If you're not a subscriber, please hit the subscribe button. And if you like the content I'm producing and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on Patreon. There is a link in the description below, and there's a link on screen now. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media, and hopefully I'll be back and there'll be a green screen behind me. Thanks for watching. See you next time on Left Foot Media.